Going to be on my screen.
No, but there are PowerPoints that are going to be shown, so we have to screen.
That's fun.
Welcome. I'm Marjorie Nathanson, the Executive Director of Hunterdon Art Museum. We are here, of course, for the panel discussion. Welcome, navigating the discussion of race and art. This conversation was prompted by the wonderful show of Kimberly Camp's dolls that is currently on the first floor. That show, titled Cross River, A Parallel Universe, which is up through January 12th, was curated by Judy Brodsky and Ferris Olin, here with us tonight. We are proud to be hosting this important conversation, which is being heard not only by the people in this room, but also those watching the webinar. If anyone watching remotely has any questions for the panelists, please type them into chat and we will get to them during the course of the evening. For those of you in the room, the panelists will gladly take your questions as well. The event is being recorded and will be posted on our website and possibly on other platforms. I would also like to note that this and all of our programs are made possible by funds from the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, a partner agency of the National Endowment for the Arts. We're grateful to our three distinguished guests for taking part in this panel. Kimberly Camp began her career as an artist over 50 years ago. Since then, her paintings and dolls have been shown throughout the United States in over 100 solo and group exhibitions. Kimberly is not only an artist, but also an arts administrator. She served as president and CEO of the Barnes Foundation, founding director of the Smithsonian Institution Experimental Gallery, and president and CEO of the Charles Wright Museum in Detroit. Currently, she is a curator for A New View, a public art project, and is on the faculty of Drexel University's Arts Administration program. Lonnie Graham is a distinguished professor of photography at Penn State. His photography and paintings have been exhibited internationally for more than 5 decades. His series, A Conversation with the World, shares the fundamentals of humanity from the wisdom of young and old all over the world. And our moderator, Rhinold Ponder, is an artist, curator, lawyer, community activist, and founder of Art Against Racism, a nonprofit based in Princeton. His creative practice focuses on dismantling racism and revealing and sharing our common humanity. In the past year, he has curated or co-sponsored several exhibitions, including The Art of Black Joy, a celebration of life, happiness, and culture at the Monroe Public Library. Earth Song Refrain, BIPOC artists on the climate and environment at the Princeton Public Library, and Manifesting Beloved Community in partnership with the West Windsor Arts Council. His work most recently appeared in exhibitions at Princeton University and the Trenton Museum. It's my pleasure to introduce Rhinold Ponder.
Thank you, Marjorie. And thank you to everyone attending, including those remotely and those who are here in person. First, allow me to say a couple of words about Art Against Racism. First of all, because Kim asked me to. And secondly, because the origins of Art Against Racism is also the origins of me meeting Kimberly. Art Against Racism is a nonprofit platform which seeks to create opportunities through the arts to educate people and communities about racism. The other element of Art Against Racism is that we try to create opportunities for people to actually do the work for creating a just and anti-racist society. We do this through exhibitions, poetry readings, programs, online galleries, and our latest literary effort, The Art of This, Easing, which you will see on our website. Currently, we have a call for art for you artists out there entitled Manifesting Beloved Community is in our 4th year in partnership with the West Windsor Arts Council. And we ask artists to consider making work around our responsibility to create a healthy planet for humanity. So please check out our website and to learn a little bit more about Art Against Racism at artagainstracism.org. Now, I had the pleasure of meeting and working with Kimberly through our second major project, which was Memorial Monument Movement, in which we chronicled work created during the pandemic around the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Amara Arbery. Kimberly's counsel and wisdom from her diverse experiences as a creative and leading arts executive were invaluable. Now, what you will be gifted with today is a presentation of her work as a supplement to a crazy, wonderful exhibit. It is here until January 12th at the Hunterdon Art Museum. You must see it. The stories, the work is fabulous, my dear. Thank you. Now, she will share many thoughts and ideas, but one of her focuses will be about the terrain a creative is forced to navigate around identity, labeling, and othering, sometimes from well-meaning folks, and sometimes from those who mean to oppress. Her presentation will be followed and amplified by the extraordinary photographer and artist, Lonnie Graham, whose work you will recognize as defiant of othering and an expression of many aspects of his own humanity and his vision of the world. So following their presentations, we will engage in a little fun town hall type discussion where we will take questions from people remotely and from the audience as we have what should be a really engaging and exciting discussion. So without furthering the anticipation of the fun and the provocative and engaging program, I welcome Kimberly Camp to the podium.
That'll keep everybody up for sure. Take a look at my notes.
Take the notes. Are these our numbers?
Probably.
I thought you were, hey, give me that.
Some of those who know me used, when I was working in the field, I would always speak extemporaneously because it seemed like I never stopped working. And so I always had this stuff in my head all the time. So it really didn't matter. You know, I'd go to talks and I'd go up about 5 minutes before the program and say, what do you want me to talk about? And I said, no, I got it. Don't worry. I'm sorry. Okay. Images, please. Images. We got stuff on the screen.
Yeah.
And while this is warming up, I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to Marjorie, Judy, and Ferris. This has been an amazing experience, and I've learned so many things, but I've been so honored to work with such distinguished women. So thank you all. I really appreciate this. I've had a couple of folks that have already asked about taking the show after this, and so we'll see what happens. Yeah, but thank you. There may be no more complex issue than that of race and art, specifically the visual arts, which rely on semiology, invention, and execution. We convey ideas about what we think and who we are in every object an artist makes. But we can't rely on the identity of the artist as the primary indicator of the artist's ability nor range of interest. Next slide, please. I paint portraits. Stagecoach Mary, a seminal figure in American history, is the first female mail deliverer, riding through the Northwest on a stagecoach with a Winchester in her lap. My intention was to show her defiance and courage. So many people first see she's Black and that she holds a gun and is therefore threatening. Next slide, please. I love to capture the qualities, values, lifestyles that resonate with everyone. I challenge people to look at the subjects as simply human. We are all alike. Human nature has not changed in the 1,000,000+ years we have walked the planet. We eat the same way, love the same way, raise children, argue, sleep, and die in the same ways. But the poison of 300 years of systemic racism that constantly drums the idea that race is primal in any and every consideration hangs dark. Next slide, please. I have memories from the time that I switched from, next image, please. I have memories of the time that I switched from painting animals, which is how I started, to people, and the perception of what and who I was allowed to render radically shifted. I was told over and over again that my work was trite and hackneyed because I painted people who looked like me. I'm certain that white counterparts are never questions about who they can render, than being told painting themselves, or that being told painting themselves decreases the importance of the work. Next slide. Next image, please. The complexity of humanity is a junction between the spiritual and the mundane. I hope that my portraits capture that junction in a way that allows people to see what I see in all its intimacy. As a Black artist, it seems to surprise people when I don't fit neatly into a category set aside just for us. The question is not about why I paint people who are Black, but rather, why is that a question at all? Can you imagine asking Renoir why he painted pinky beige nudes in his skin color? Which I used to say when I was at the Barnes, much to the chagrin of many. Next slide, please. The common threads of simple human life extend far beyond the artificiality of race. I love the vibrations of strong colors and what they say about people who live in those environments. Next image. I just mentioned spirituality earlier, and I want to go back to how that is represented in my work. From the time I can remember, I was told that we were all made in God's image. So why wouldn't God look like me? To relate to traditional, spiritual, and religious practices that precede the creation of Judeo-Christian belief is thought of as irrelevant and unimportant, creating work that does not rely on the white gaze. It's still a mystery to me that we can think that 2 million years ago, when Lucy was discovered as the oldest known woman, that a supreme being decided to only talk to people when there could be written documentation of the word. Next image. There are similarities in most religious and spiritual practices for people all over the world. Our shared humanity shines through. The practice of adoration, sacrifice, transcendence, and ritual are found everywhere. With the creation of race, the idea that valid religious beliefs only originate in one tiny corner of the planet, with all else being referred to as pagan and worse, continues to prevail. Next image. If people can see in the work the way that husbands and wives interact, the ways an uncle with his nephews clown around a lazy summer day with a pitcher of cold Kool-Aid handy, if they can see themselves in these relationships, then I consider the work successful. These have nothing to do with race and everything to do with humanity. Next image. In some ways, my portraiture is an act of defiance. I challenge the viewer to look beyond the constraints of skin color. It's not centered on racial identity, and time again, the white gaze calls that to question. Next slide. And then there's play. In much the same way as work and play are common denominations in the life of everything that breathes, my dolls are fun. My time to be serious is when I paint. My time to make dolls is the manifestation of my sense of humor. Next image. They come from everywhere and nowhere in particular. They come from the same hands that paint. They challenge our ideas about fine art and craft in the way Black artists are challenged by the limitation of the meaning of their work to identity. These two pieces, I will tell you, my grandmother inspired because she called somebody a fish-faced fool one day. And so I just had to make some. Next image. I spend a lot of time researching the history of racism, why and how it was created to justify enslavement. Yes, it had a beginning at a specific point in time with specific people, namely Pope Nicholas V, who in 1455 declared dark-skinned people to be lesser humans who could be exploited and enslaved and had the same status as cattle. Next slide. It was only recently in response to a specific question about Blackness that my dolls took a turn, albeit slightly, to show what the definition of Blackness is. To me, it means to be of this world in its entirety. Next slide. It took me a year to recalibrate myself to creating dolls that specifically address the question of what is Blackness. Historian Nell Painter, in her book, Creating African Americans, writes that we are the second most indigenous people in the country. We only exist here. I can remember having conversations with Lonnie because I couldn't figure out what I was supposed to do. I usually just make anything that's fun, whatever I feel like. Horrifically self-indulgent, but nonetheless. To be asked to address a specific topic I'd never really done in the 40-some years that I'd been doing the work. And Lonnie just kept saying, just do what you do. Just do what you do, it's fine. It took me a year to figure out what that was. And so I then decided that I would go in a slightly different direction. Next image. We were Fanti, Yoruba, Igbo, Bambara when we were loaded into ships and then declared as Black. The first 200 years of colonial America and revolution ardently exacted a one-drop rule. One drop of Black blood meant you were Black, not a person, but property. Next image. I made 14 new pieces this year that hope to convey the complexity of that reality. Big Al, a Geechee hero, followed ships across the Atlantic and avenged those who were murdered in Middle Passage by creating violent, damaging storms to take down what was built with our blood. Big Al is wearing the papal bull that Nicholas signed, giving the Portuguese the right to defy Christian values, to gain wealth and power, gained by horrific violence against children. This is white history, world history. Next image, please. I wonder if the hypocondescension of Blackness can ever be extricated from our cultural and societal vocabulary. Hypodescension refers to the automatic assignment of children in a mixed race union to the subordinate group. The same applies to adults. And we've developed a whole vocabulary around trying to define how much Black is Black. But it always goes back to that one drop rule that was established during the colonial period. What purpose does it serve to categorize the obvious? At the Museum of African American History, a label writer asked about using the proper identifier in our exhibition. She asked, because we were doing a survey show, should we use Negro? Should we use Black? What should we use based on the historic period to identify us? And I waited until she finished and I said, why are you identifying us? This is our house. Identify you. We were the first museum to ever do that. And it's important because museums tend to write in, I call it Godspeak, right? This sort of disembodied voice of authority that comes in as though no one wrote it, that it sort of manifested the words, where in fact, faulty people, smart people, stupid people, amazing people, dedicated people, use their voices to talk about the evidence of our civilization. And if those voices do not include the Black voice, then they tend to be limited only to a small percentage of the population. Next image. actually, when talking to Lonnie about putting this program together, thought, well, maybe if I took a piece of writing about art, and instead of putting in black, I put in white, what it would sound like. These works reflect a wide range of creative practices, ideas, and backgrounds. White Americans' art is not easily defined by category, but a rich gathering of individual expression by people who share the legacy of immigration or displacement from their ancestral lands in Europe. White American art is also deeply intertwined with the history of race in the United States, from the colonial period until today. These works are far more than a group of personal statements about identity or recorded moments. They have power, beauty, and meaning that extend beyond categorization to achieve timeless, universal appeal. When we begin to use those words to identify race in different ways, the issues and the subtleties of how we use identifiers come to fore. Next image. I think what's most important is to understand that as a social construct, the idea of race was created. I'm not sure that we can ever get past the poison of systemic racism and use a different language. My goal with my art is to encourage the discussion. I'm still learning about how I feel about these things, how I identify with them, and what purpose they serve. That's not to say that I don't enjoy being a Black artist. I wear that mantle proudly. But I'm more than that. I have a bigger voice. I hope that my work speaks to a bigger moment in time, one that challenges us all to remember that at the core, we're all the same. Thank you.
Now I'd like to invite Lonnie Graham forward. He says he doesn't want to go, but he's going, he's coming, he'll be here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us, and thanks for inviting me, Kimberly. Thank you for writing. Yeah, I'll get there. I didn't write anything down, but everybody has beautifully prepared notes. But I just have this life. I started in a place called Seldom Seen in southwestern Pennsylvania. We lived just up the hill from the mill. And so southwestern Pennsylvania back in the 50s and 60s, as you could imagine, was just filled with every single kind of industry there was to support the growth and development of the United States that we were building in those days and recovering from after the war. So there had immigrated name somebody, you'd be hard pressed to name people that weren't there. In my neighborhood, we were the Black people. We were the colored people that lived in Seldom Seen. So that young fellow, that 6-year-old fellow that imagined his life as an artist, simply imagined his life as an artist. So that the radical teenager that I grew into, in the late 60s and 70s, was rebelling against the notion that mentors had sort of fashioned for me as I was showing at the Westmoreland County Museum of Art as a painter and being introduced as the Black artist. Because during that time, there was a Black art movement, and I was very familiar with it. I read the books, I read the encyclopedia, and there was so many people that were involved in Black Power movements and the racial struggles at that time. But I don't think I didn't imagine anything like that for myself when I was in kindergarten. So that by the time I got to where I needed to begin to negotiate who and how I was and how I acted as an artist, my mission was to communicate, because I knew I was living the idea that art was the visual communication of a particular human experience. There weren't any other qualifiers or identifiers in that definition. The only thing that I knew that I had to do, I would fail if I wasn't communicating. The art wasn't working. The thing that I knew that I had to do was successfully communicate our common experience as humans, right? So, I wonder, oh, look. Let's see what happens. Oh, yeah. So I started, as a matter of fact, when I was a youngster, go ahead, try another one. Look at that. So, yeah, so that's how, somebody gave me a camera and I went outside and I took a bunch of pictures and, they sent my, people sent them off and then I got a bunch of prizes. They sent me a bunch of money and I thought this photography thing's not bad. But I kept painting. I wasn't very good at it. You're much better at it than I am.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. So photography, and it was, it's easy. I just push the button. So go ahead.
Next slide, please.
He's paying attention.
It's amazing.
That's Bethune. That's the part of the beach between Daytona and the Kennedy Space Center that Mary Bethel, she bought that beach so Black people could go and swim in the ocean because we couldn't go to the ocean. Because I don't know. The other picture you saw was Robben Island, where Go ahead, show some more pictures. That's in Italy, looking south toward Africa.
Do you have a question? He actually would like for you to ask a question
Yeah.
while he's.
So that's along
If
the
you have
Underground
any.
Railroad. Go ahead, I'm sorry, did somebody no kids.
Okay, yeah, I thought I heard something too.
That's out along the Underground Railroad somewhere. That's a long story.
Lonnie.
It's a good story.
Tell it. Share.
Okay. So I'm up like, I've only got a few minutes and I'm talking slow.
No, you don't.
No. We've only got 10 minutes. I don't want to take up a lot of time. We can come back to it, but
Just tell
it's the Marauders. Okay, so I'm in Muhu, right? I'm in Muhu. You might know where that is. I'm in Muhu. This is in Estonia. This is like way in the heck up, around the Arctic Circle someplace. And I'm living on a farm and it's next to what was known as the stronghold. It wasn't anything. It was just like a little it was a circle of rocks, right? And I'd go out to the stronghold and I'd get up and I'd, wait for the world to turn and take pictures of the sky. And I found a rock that said something about 1277. It was in Estonia. But what I found out, this is on the causeway that connects Muhu to the mainland, right? And from what I understand, in 1200 something, the Marauders, because I got in the habit of talking to people, and that'll come up later, but the Marauders came from the south. They came up through Latvia and Lithuania, and they got to, and they were like, they're Marauders, right? They're not very nice people. And they were all the people that lived in this little island, well, so many of them, the ones that didn't run off into the forest got into this stronghold, but the Marauders wiped them out. And then they took the stones from this fort, from the stronghold, and they built a causeway to connect the islands so that they could. easily get back and forth between these places. So as I was talking, you'll see them later, but as I was talking to these people, it turns out that what they were doing essentially was running into the woods and living out in the forest so that they could maintain the beliefs that they had held on to for centuries. This is who they were. This is what kind of people they were. And if they were told that if they didn't accept these new ideas from these marauders, that they would,
I have a question.
what?
What does this have to do with being black?
Well, not much. Very little.
That's a good question, though.
Very little.
Because you just said all of our being and our humanity, is part of our blackness. Isn't that what I just heard?
Yeah.
Hang on a minute.
Okay.
So you go.
So after talking to him, I'm gonna get, so after talking to these people, it turns out that they would, I guess they kind of liked me because I kept going back, right? So, because I was sort of fascinated by this whole thing. So they take me out and then they would show me like the rock. And then they would take me over and they would show me the tree. And then there was like this very special place where the water would come out of the ground, and they would show me all these, really special places that they still held on to, these ideas and these rituals that they would still practice. And the marauders murdered them over. So yeah, that's where that is. That's one of those places. Go ahead, show some more pictures. I'll tell you some more stuff later. What? No, you, wait a minute. Here. No, you got a question.
I just wanted to know who the marauders were.
What do you call them? Crusaders.
So I know we took you off track and asked you to tell that story. But I just wanted to let you know that we have about
See what I mean?
minutes?
See, I told you, that's why I didn't want to tell the story. That's exact, because I knew that I was going to take too long. Go ahead, show another picture. I'm not gonna say anything else. I'm gonna take up more questions. You just be quiet. Oh, that's right up the street from the Dalai Lama's house. Go ahead. It is, it's right. I know, that's spitty. Go ahead. Okay, these are installations. You know about these. You've seen these. That's Andora's
So how
house.
many years have you known him?
40 something.
There you go.
Did you say, whoa, wait a minute. What'd you say? What was that?
I said,
She said-
the stereo, it looked like something that's at my grandparents' house.
All righty.
You ready?
My work here is done. And that's what happens.
Could you repeat what the audience said?
I'm sorry, what's your name?
I'm Anita. and-
Hi, Anita.
Hi, how are
I'm
you?
Lonnie, hi.
Are you at Penn State?
Yeah.
I'm at Penn State grad, 1979.
Oh, turn around.
That's
My
Penn
bad.
State
There's a
over there.
whole, that's a
They
whole.
have
Penn
like
State.
the whole area.
Penn State. But I was a trouble Penn Stater because I fought them every day. But I just said that looked like a radio that was in my grandparents' home.
It
And
looks like
that's,
my grandparents' house too.
Like all of our grandparents' house.
Yeah.
Where's the plastic?
I mean, we had French provincial
So did you
furniture at
set
home.
these up and then photograph them?
Mhm.
And if you.
Well, wait a minute.
Because you said it was-
And this was different, but John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King, they were in the dining room together. But they were in the dining room together.
Standard installation.
Yeah, we had that too.
And where was Jesus?
My grandfather was a music director in multiple.
The Brett
churches,
girl
so there were
Jesus.
like, he had Bibles and everything.
Okay, we need to let
All right, go
Lonnie,
ahead.
come on.
Now you can talk.
an essential part of our common humanity.
Yes.
There you go. See, here we go.
There we have it. So these things were made so that whenever you walk into them and sit down and listen to Louis Armstrong and watch the Ed Sullivan on the television that was pre-recorded, everybody would have in some way, and be able to relate to some part of that common experience that we all have. Go ahead, that was my father's house, go. I'm gonna stop talking so much, go ahead. A Home in the Homeless, that was. Oh, the African American Garden Project. So I was taking people from, Pennsylvania, over to Kenya so they could figure out how to grow food. And then I brought the Kenyans over to the United States so they could see that it's not that great. Go ahead. Oh, that's Harry. Harry knows that's down in South Carolina someplace. And the kids were, failing all their tests. So we built, they needed food.
Maybe.
They weren't getting proper nutrition. So we built a garden and they kept the school open for another 5 years. Go ahead. Oh, yeah. So this one, did we do that trip? Or was that a different trip?
Different trip.
So that was, it was Ghanaian. So I went to Ghana. I photographed these people whose ancestors had probably built the house. And then this is a kind of a good story. And so I'm so sorry. I'm just going over time. I don't care. So.
We want to have a conversation.
Okay, fine. I'll stop. Okay, go ahead. I'll tell you later. Go ahead.
Oh, we want to hear the story.
I know.
We have,
Many
No time.
stories.
This is what I go. Okay, fine. Oh, this was the internment site at Middleton Plantation. Thaddeus Mosley did the sculpture. You can see nobody, hundreds of people were interned in that site. Hundreds of slaves were buried. I got chiggers. I had to fight my way through those brambles to get to, go ahead. Oh, and then, so I went back because somebody's doing a documentary about Thad because he's like old. And you know how it is when you're an artist, you get old, you get ready to die, and everybody, I went back to the site and they got benches, they've got a little gate, they've got. This is the slave quarters. Those people, stop that. I don't care.
but Lonnie,
Okay, fine, go ahead.
Sweet.
Okay, I'm almost, I'll be quiet.
Care.
No, okay,
We need you to care.
I'm gonna stand over here. Go ahead.
No,
Go ahead.
But you
Next
have
slide,
Kimberly
please.
here.
Yes,
right?
Kimberly's there. Next slide, please.
And this is her exhibit downstairs.
Next slide, please. Next, go ahead, next slide, please. Cincinnati Museum of Art, meditation space over in North Philadelphia. Next slide, please.
to say that.
Yeah, that's North, go ahead. West Philadelphia, go ahead. Now, this is part of something, and this is really easy. This is part of something called the Conversation with the World. And I go around and I ask people a bunch of questions and I take their pictures. Just keep going. I could be done. And I hand the floor back to our hosts.
Thank you very much, Lonnie. We wanted to give everyone a chance to ask questions and to enter into this town hall type of aspect of this presentation. And I have a question for both of you to start. And that is, how does your upbringing relate to your work? It's just that simple. And start with you, Kimberly.
So I was born in Camden, New Jersey. And my dad was a dental surgeon. And my mother was home with me and we lived above my dad's office. And he was easily the worst businessman that ever existed. And so it took getting to adulthood to realize that all of my other friends grew up far well off than we did. But when you're a child, you don't think about those things, right? That mom cooks on an apartment-sized stove that's 20 inches wide, and there's one bathroom with a tub, and the bedrooms are on the 3rd floor, and she taught me how to escape out of the window on the 3rd floor and jump down to roofs in the event of fire. It was a building that was so old, there were still gaslight fixtures in the walls, and it was haunted.
Yes, it was.
And as an only child, I spent incredible amounts of time entertaining myself, which was really, really easy to do because at the corner where I lived, there was a Carnegie Library that I absolutely love. I could describe every inch of the library, from the circular desk in the center to the busts of great writers at the ends of the stacks. And I would spend countless hours in the library. Children weren't allowed to borrow books from upstairs. We had pink library cards, so we had to go down in the children's library. But if I could get my mother to give me her card, then I could go upstairs and have those privileges. So she said, if I read the children's library and finished it, that I could go upstairs. And so not too long after that, I said, I'm done. And she said, I read them all. And so she said, no, I said, yeah, I read them all. And so she would go down and she'd pull a book out and say, what is this one about? Oh, Miss Hickory, it's about a little doll and her head is made of a nut. And she goes on a little adventure and it's like, oh, what is about this one? Oh, this is when you make apple dolls, head dolls from Appalachia. You carve them and you let them dry, et cetera, et cetera. I proved my worth. And so I got her card. The other really important element was that there was an art supply store directly across the street. Albert Sabar is where I bought my first set of acrylic paints, where I bought monster models of the Black Lagoon and Frankenstein to put together with glue and plastic, where I learned how to do copper embossing and plaster casting and making airplanes out of balsa wood. And what did all that mean? Created a love for stories, a love for research, and a love for experimentation with materials. We, unlike a lot of the other families that were my dad's colleagues, they would travel all the time. We couldn't do that because my dad was, he had a twin. That's a whole other story. So the piece that's downstairs, that's baby Idowu, my dad was an identical twin. Actually, on my mother's marriage certificate, it says she's married to Uncle Herbert instead of my dad. There were very few people who could tell them apart. But all of my dad's family are all artists. Every single one of them. Uncle Donald made American history, won a Guggenheim, a Pew, and an NEA fellowship in the same year, although I have two and he only has one, haha. Uncle Bill, concert pianist who won the Major Bowes Talent Hour. Some of you are old enough to remember what that was. My dad, dental surgeon and designer, his brother, a painter, ceramic artist. Uncle Jim, wood sculptor. Aunt Sylvia, plein air painter. Uncle Ira, Jehovah's Witness minister, pilot, swimmer, jewelry maker. They all had their hands in the work. And so family reunions were very different. We would talk about a lot of different things, but there were so many interests among us, and we never talked about any issue of race. It sort of gets introduced after you sort of get out there. And I can remember I was, when I had come back to New Jersey after school, and a friend of mine was teaching at Stockton, and she said, oh, we have a gallery down here. You should send something to the gallery director and ask about doing a show. So I did. This is before the internet. And so I wrote a letter and sent slides. And he wrote back and he said, your work is very nice. But we don't show outside artists. But for Black History Month, we can make an exception. At which point I wrote back and said, what told you, well, why did you think I'm Black? There was nothing in the letter that suggested that. But it was that whole start of sort of that realization that while I could claim the world and everything in it, that I could research, you know, I taught myself Latin when I was 10 because I wanted to be a Ghostbuster. I would go through the library catalog and see if I could find a topic that wasn't even in the card catalog, so that I could try to then figure out where it could be in there, because it was so Eurocentric at that time that to find things that weren't that bent just kept digging and digging and digging. And I loved it. And I think it's reflected in my work because I have broad interests in the world. I love doing research and exploring ideas and how things came about and how they come. And I love materials. And my studio looks like that. It's piled with fabrics and beads and feathers and bows and tools and all kinds of stuff. So very seldom when I'm creating do I have to go get anything from outside. I just go into the studio and I know where every single thing is. And so it allows me to just continue to just keep pouring it out. Will that interest ever become specific to identity? Sometimes it does. Sometimes it has absolutely no relationship whatsoever. But it doesn't stop people from trying to figure out if what I do is black art.
So,
And-
I'm sorry, no.
No, I was gonna say, there really isn't a thing like that. I mean, mind you, and I read an article by Carol Walker in preparation for this panel, because there was one point at which she kept being described as a black artist, and she wrote a piece that was rather controversial, because she said, I'm more than a black artist, right? People got offended. What do you mean you're more than a black artist? What do you don't like being black? Yeah, I do. But that's not the parameter through which you can understand and hear what I'm trying to say as an artist.
So, Lonnie, can you share with us how your upbringing, especially being in seldom seen, and you talk a little bit about invisibility too, how does that factor into what you do? Your upbringing?
Can they hear us?
Yes.
We can talk well.
Yeah,
Just talk.
yeah. Well, like I said, the mission, you know, the idea was to get to the bottom of identity, to get to the essence of an identity. So who was I when I wake up in the morning? You know, what was I first? You know, when I'm laying in the bed, I open my eyes, and then what do I feel like I am?
Were these thoughts that you had as a kid growing up?
Yeah.
Yeah, about how early and how did it really manifest itself?
So I declared my commitment to the arts when I was 5 years old.
Okay.
And so that, you know, I started to having to kind of deal with a lot of these kinds of questions. I guess when I started taking art lessons, I started to go to the Cleveland Art Museum at about 7 or 8 years old. I was, you know, my mother would give me $1 and I'd get on the bus, and then I'd get to the museum and I'd draw.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, he lives
At
My mom and
7
dad-
years old, you were on the bus by yourself?
It was the 60s.
Okay, I'm just asking. I'm from the south side of Chicago.
I
So,
think
but
that-
you're in Selma.
Yeah, I think well, an important piece that Lonnie left out
Okay,
is that, because I've had these conversations with him, and I said, you know, how did you become this person who would just like get on a
This is
plane
what-
and go,
right.
right? You know, I didn't have that kind of courage until much later, that I could just go.
And in case you haven't heard, they've known each other for 40 years, so that's why you have
Yeah.
the banter the way it
And
is.
so, you know, after the years of knowing Lonnie, and I realized that he sort of self-emancipated when he was a kid.
Okay,
And he was in a family environment that, and I've never gone into the reason because it doesn't matter. But he was, for the most part, raised by an aunt and uncle and seldom seen. So he started in Cleveland. But imagine the courage that it took to do that, but also the amazing adventure that it put him on.
Were you scared to do that? Did you think, you didn't even think about it?
no, not if he's going on the bus at 7. So are you a person that really enjoyed, and I have so many questions for you, but one of them
And
is
we're both
about
kind of only children.
So here we go. So my question was about solitude. So you have a great appreciation for solitude and for imagination?
Well, I think yeah.
And so how do you grapple with that in terms of the identity and the being othered and people labeling what you do?
That's a problem that people have. And so that I try to figure out how, like, the best and the most dignified way to navigate issues that exist within people's own experience, right? So just as an example, whenever I get stopped by, you know, like a state trooper or something, and I get surrounded by, you know, a whole bunch of policemen or something, you know, I'm like, I'm geriatric. You know?
You're still getting stopped like that?
Oh my
Oh, yeah.
gosh. Yeah, oh, that's
Yeah.
that's another shared story.
Because
So
My mom had to bail him out of jail for being black, but go ahead.
So there I am, you know, being black among, you know, a whole bunch of sort of young fellows that are fully armed with guns, with mace, with tasers and pistols. and on one occasion, I lost my patience. Usually I try to remain, dignified. But, I get out of the car, and I'm like, why? What are you doing? Take a look at me. You're 35 years old. You've got friends. You've got a bulletproof vest. I'm an old, frail man. Just shoot me. Just shoot me now and be done with it. Get it over with. I am not your problem. Clearly, I'm unarmed. Just shoot me now. And the problem will be solved. Because just get me out of the way, because then you will realize what the problem is, and it's not me.
So
The problem exists here.
So this is a question.
You are the problem.
So this is a question for both of you. Is there a parallel to that? Because that can take you in the art world.
Yes, absolutely.
So either one of you.
Go ahead.
So explain that to us.
I think it is because your work is not within, so Lonnie mentioned the Black Power movement in the arts, which there's actually been multiple
Yeah.
Black Power movements in the arts ever since there have been Black people here, right? But there's this perception somehow that you're not allowed to speak outside of your voice. Or that if you're speaking in your voice, that is absolutely what you're supposed to do, and it has nothing to do with me, but that's what those people do. And I remember that, I reread the Toni Morrison transcript from the interview that she did where, what was the guy's name? I forget. There's one tip on my tongue. But anyway, she did this interview some years, Charlie Rose, I think it was, who asked her if she would ever write a book about white people. And she said, for my entire life, I've been avoiding writing books through the white gaze. That no one would also ask another artist, another writer, why they would do that, right? But we get asked that all the time, as though somehow we're supposed to respond in that space. What's fascinating to me, as I have found in my own research, the assumptions of what that category is are completely and totally misidentified, misunderstood, and mislabeled. I'm 42% Westphalian German and French, and 44% Yoruba, and the rest is other. We don't know what that means yet. But what I often tell people, what's yours is mine, but what's mine is not yours. Those Dresden plates belong to me. I am a manifestation of white history. I am a manifestation of Black history. That's what being Black in America is. We all have great color skin. And so the legacy that we live is one that says, your world is my world, but there are these assumptions, ideas, practices, behaviors, thoughts, oppressions, stereotypes, negatives, violence, all of that kind of stuff that is part of ours. And how do you navigate that? I've always navigated it by trying to figure out why. What purpose, what does it add to the work to combine the notion of identity? If I'm doing work that's specific to that, and Lonnie and I actually went on a trip, I was researching the origins of enslavement as a form of commerce. And so we went to Ghana and we talked to people about the enslavement. And I will never forget this conversation with Victoria Baeta, who had beads on a card that she would bring to the States. And she would talk about how many beads were traded for how many people. And we're sitting in Victoria's living room and she said, I said, can you, we have all this video equipment and cameras and stuff, we record everything. Although certain places, none of the cameras would work, and the minute we got outside, they all worked, but that's a whole other story. And so I said, what is the relationship that you see to Ghanaians to African Americans? And she said, I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean. And I said, well, African Americans, Ghanaians, what do you see as the relationship? And she said, I'm sorry, I don't understand. So Lonnie starts laughing. And he says, the Negroes. Oh, yes, she said, the Negroes, they are our children. She said, at first, we sold our criminals. But after a time, the money corrupted our people and we began to sell our good sons. No one man or two men from a boat did this. And so she started talking about the different kinds of beads that Europeans brought and the number of people that were traded for each kind of one of those beads. That was actually when I started collecting beads, antique beads. And Lonnie and I have, and he has a far more extensive collection than I do, but grappling with the idea of what that meant. That the only tangible evidence of the enslavement that's left is us and the beads. It says as much about the power that we put in man-made objects as it does about the value of life. And the sort of, as a moment of commerce, how did it become so laden with all the ideas about systemic racism? Where did that part come from? And that's as much about the psychosociological elements of creating an inferior and creating a superior.
So let's take that a step further. When we talk about commerce and economics. So when you think about dismantling structural racism, which has all types of different tentacles, but at the base, from what I'm hearing from you, is the idea of value, commerce. So, and as we know, commerce, if it's either beads or it's dollars, the structure is based on faith and belief in stories.
That's exactly right.
How do you battle with that? And you talked a little bit about language and how difficult it is to change language, which is also as difficult to change culture. But in your practice and in who you are, how do you deal with that? And Lonnie, the same with you.
I mean, I can absolutely say that I talk about race a lot because I'm trying to figure out a lot of it myself. And most people come in my gallery in Collingswood, if they stay long enough, they're gonna have a conversation about it because that's where I always go, because I'm still exploring all this stuff myself. Language has such incredible power. The idea that the words we use have specific meaning is in many ways underestimated. My words mean something to me, your words mean something to you. Our challenge as human beings is to have the two meet in the middle. That we use the same words and they have the same meaning. When we come from a different cultural base, that's very difficult to do. But when we look at the issue of systemic racism, we have to say the quiet parts out loud. Because I think it has value to hear those words and sort of really think about what they mean. The piece downstairs that's Honey Child, the raccoon, which is one of my favorites. She's actually made out of a raccoon coat.
Gorgeous.
Because I recycle furs for people who are about to ditch them. She's wearing a version of the Little Black Sambo book, right? And when I was asked about this question of what is Blackness, and I thought about the book, which I still had from when I was 10 years old, it's in mint condition. And so I'm reading this book, and I remember when I was a kid thinking, like, what did the curly-toed shoes have to do with Black kids? And what's up with the tiger? And then I realized it was a story about a Tamil child from East India. It had nothing to do with Black Americans. But it was a convenient tool to create an inferiority. So by vulgarizing the images, you can create an inferior being, you can reinforce an idea of inferiority. And so the images were changed over time so that they were images of Black children. And of course, calling somebody a Sambo is considered, the ultimate racial insult. What are you doing to us? But again, if you're going to create those tiers of understanding of who's on top and who's on bottom, because that's artificial, you have to create traits, characteristics, words, language, images of inferiority and superiority.
Stories.
If we are going to say that shouldn't be, we know they're all the same people. The same thing that determines eye color determines skin color. So there are more differences in breeds of dogs than there are in races of people. It's a social construct. It doesn't exist. But when you start to say the quiet parts out loud, I think it causes people to think a little bit more intensely about what is being said and what's being done. The automatic assumption, and in my work, the automatic assumption of inferiority comes every time I do an exhibition. It never fails. Somebody will walk up to me and say, "Did you make those heads?" Yeah. That's why they make me sit here in this exhibition. The clothes too? And I asked somebody one time, I said, "Why are you asking me that?" And the lady said, "Well, they're so complex." One person said at an exhibition I did it in liquid, but they're so amazing. You made those? Yes, I'm amazing. But there's this idea somehow that it couldn't just be me. When I worked in the museum field, I was a museum president and CEO for 25 years. I'd have people walk up to me all the time and say, oh, you know a lot about art. I said, that's why I'm the president and CEO. And there wasn't a day in the field that somebody didn't tell me, either subtly or directly, that I was where I did not belong. I didn't care what they thought. That was about their problem. That was their issue. Because racism is not my history. I am not the one who created the system, nor am I one who perpetuates it. But we are all victims to it. So until we stop looking at it as Black history and start looking at it as white history or American history, we can't even get close to understanding what it has done to the way that we think.
Lonnie, did you want to follow up on that?
I'm sort of curious about what people are thinking, but yes, indeed, there's, okay, fine.
No, I don't want to interrupt you.
No, it's okay.
I just wanted to know if either of you would like to comment on whether you think religion plays is a factor or a variable in the way that you're thinking about understanding the universal.
Rhinold, can you repeat the question for the people that are on the webinar?
Would you repeat the question, please?
Louder,
Whether
please.
religion
Or
plays
just
a
move up
role
some so
in-
we can hear you.
Sorry, I didn't want to be
It's all right.
taking
Okay.
up space. I'm just curious, you talked a lot about the universal and the sort of the universal human experience, and I'm wondering whether you could say anything about religion or faith as something that either cuts against the universal or promotes the universal.
So basically, what the role of religion in these ideas
In
about
this
universal,
universality.
yes.
Everybody's got it.
Everybody's got religion?
Everybody has, okay, if we define religion
Mhm,
as a specific belief that people hold on to
mhm.
as a kind of faith or an idea that's practiced on a regular basis.
Mhm. Okay,
If that's a religion, then everybody's got one.
so is there, some people would make a distinction between spirituality and religion. Are you saying you don't make that distinction?
Well, then that's a subset, that's a subset of a religious belief.
Okay,
If I don't want to believe something religiously, oddly, that's kind of a religion.
so you're saying, so atheism.
That's kind of a religion.
Okay, so you don't necessarily agree with that?
I think of religion as an organized practice that is institutionalized with a set of values and a set of mores and a set of ideas.
And that's what happens when people get a hold of it. Whenever,
However, there are people who can be spiritual outside of those systems.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know, I've I mentioned earlier that I wanted to be a Ghostbuster when I was 2. It's the other part of this space that I do a lot of research in, and that is the metaphysical and the occult.
So as you go there, one of the strange things for me about that exhibit downstairs, you've got spirituality all running all the way through it. At least that's what I felt. Is that what was happening?
It's as much about my exploring the origins of where race and racism came from as it is exploring the ideas of what is the superior other
Mm-hmm.
and how does that manifest. And I explored in a lot of those different traditions. I could say that I'm a pagan. I don't know that I would claim being Christian. I'm probably not. I was raised in a Christian tradition, nothing wrong with it at all. But I have a different set of interests. And a lot of the work that I've been doing over the past 20 or so years has been into traditional Yoruba religion. Actually, before I found out that I had Yoruba ancestry. My godfather was Babatunde Olatunji, the drummer. And I can remember one day going into my altar and practicing pagan and putting things on my altar. And I called Baba and I said, why am I putting grits and chicken and dried fish on my altar? And he laughed. The ancestors are calling you. I had no idea what he was talking about. And so in the same way that I've explored the ideas around enslavement and racism, I went to travel to find out what these spiritual practices were. So I went to Brazil to look at candomblé. I went to Osogbo to look at Yoruba tradition and to the Oshun Festival. I went to Cuba, I've been to New Orleans, and I've been sort of looking at if Judeo-Christian practice is what helped enslave us, then what happened before that? And that's as much a part of my exploration as any of that. So yeah, you see that.
So, but the same question for Lonnie, and I don't think people fully understood, because I did not, that some of those pictures at the beginning were photographs, not paintings.
Those are all photographs.
But as I'm looking at the ones about nature, and we talk about spirituality and the openness and the closeness to whatever the being might be, I get a sense that you're looking for something or you're seeing something and you're sharing something that's spiritual. Wrong, right?
No, those are kinds of meditations. When you're standing out there, it's 4 o'clock in the morning, and you're standing there, and you start to hear things, the water starts to move, the wind starts to change, the attitude of the world literally shifts a little bit. It's like, you know, you're waiting for the world to turn, basically. And it becomes a kind of a meditation. Because everything is very quiet, usually, it's very still. And the world turns and I'm a witness.
So quick, easy question, maybe easy for you, not for everybody else. What in the hell does that have to do with Blackness?
What does it have to do with humanity?
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
What does it have to do with the way that all of us try to figure out a way to make sense of everything that we see or think we understand or don't understand? How is it that I go to much the same way you did go to many, many, many places in the world, and many of the people, most of the people that I speak with have a way that they reconcile their own or their society's understanding of what's happening around them in the world.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. I know we have 1 question from the remote. Let's take that question. And hopefully I'll remember my 2. It's about play. I want to talk about play.
I believe this question is for Lonnie. How did your journey to Kenya and Ghana affect your creative journey? Because I'm trying to visually tie the earlier photographs with your latter portfolio.
Did everyone hear the question?
Not
Can you repeat the question, please?
How did your journey to Kenya?
Take your hand.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm fairly loud. There is. How did your journey to Kenya and Ghana affect your creative journey? Because I am trying to visually tie the earlier photographs, which are later portfolio.
Ah, interesting.
To the person at home, and thank you. I went to Kenya in the mid-70s. So
How old?
20 something.
Okay.
And because I was looking to try to figure out where the artists were in Kenya. And that didn't occur. I didn't find that answer for a long time. But the question had to do with how my trips to West Africa and East Africa and maybe many other places on the continent
Relate to what your later work, the work you're doing now.
Yeah.
Everything informs, just like you were explaining earlier, everything informs, like one event informs another event. I take many of the things that I learned as a photographer in speaking with people, doing the conversation project, and an activist trying to help a community find water or another community find food. I use many of the photographs for other purposes. The photographs are in a way, an entryway into a project or into a society or into a community. And they're all tools. So what I'm doing as an artist is I'm using I'm trying to solve problems. And I'm trying to use information that I find in my experience to address issues or to solve problems in other parts of my experience. And all of this business is trying to figure out how to help people understand how and why the arts are important. I'm not just a decoration. I'm not just entertainment. I'm here to try and figure out and help you understand our original purpose. I'm coming as problem solvers within the context of our community.
May I have a fist bump while she asks her question?
But
Thank
can
you.
I-
Yes.
So, but how did that happen for you? Because there are lots of, I mean, you're an activist. And did by going out to different places make you decide, I need to be doing more than just taking pictures?
Yes.
Okay, so when did that happen? How did that happen? Because there are lots of people like, I'm an artist and I just do pretty things or I do ugly things, but that's just what I do. How did this thing expand beyond taking imagery?
Two things. One had a great deal to do with the fact that whenever I left California, because I lived in California for a while and came back to, I keep wanting to say the United States, came back to Pennsylvania. It's in my head. So I had accumulated a big portfolio of work. I showed my Uncle Floyd, the fellow that raised me, and he was, those people were so sweet. He nodded his head and said, mm-hmm. 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 Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's. Mm-hmm. And then, Kimberly suggested that I go down and talk to some guy who had some children's center in Pittsburgh. And I started to work for him a little bit. And I started working with a bunch of young people there in these kind of high school programs. And I started to see that and talk to them about art and artwork and what they were doing. And much of what they were talking about and doing had nothing to do with art whatsoever.
Let me throw this in there to your story, because I think this is an important point. Throughout those experiences, what you did was expose yourself to a different aesthetic. And you explored aesthetic as though there was no central idea to which everything else had to refer. But rather each one of those sets of ideas and values of what we find beautiful exist in specific places, but are also common to us all. So that defies this notion of only doing work through a Western canon.
Mm-hmm.
It defies this notion that fine artists only paint and sculpt and craft artists only do this.
Mm-hmm.
It eliminates those lines. Because when you're a student of the world, when you're Black in this country, the aesthetics of what we do is entirely different. It's far more inclusive. It's far more diverse. And it continues to be an ongoing exploration of how far can this really go in totally embracing all of humanity.
And that's the thing that I learned. That's why whenever I was traveling to Kenya, West Africa, South Africa, all over the creation, and I was looking for the guy, I really was serious about looking for the guy with the easel in the little house at the back of the lane.
That wasn't the artist.
He wasn't there. That wasn't the artist. That's not what they were doing. Nobody was doing anything like that at the time. People were building houses. They were making vessels. People were fashioning instruments for rituals. People were doing things that made sense within the context of their culture. Those were the artists, right? So that whenever I did this, the first piece that you saw, that you said, that looks like my house. When I built that thing and photographed it, and I brought it, Christina had a lot to do with that, and brought it to Uncle Floyd and said, look, Uncle Floyd, this is in the museum. Uncle Floyd took that and looked at it and said,
Looks like my house.
Looks like.
that's my house. What? What is that? That's my house. And I'm going like, yeah, that's the house. It's in the museum. That's all right. That's all right. So then I was like, I'm an artist. I think that answers the question.
Let me add this piece from the museum perspective too, and that is, people go to museums to edify themselves.
Mhm.
Because museums speak with the authority of what is important and valued in our society. We never say that to people, but we convey that through the images, through the structure, to the space, to the colors, the enormity of all of those kind of things. So we say, when you walk in here, you're seeing things that are of value, right? And when you don't see yourself in there, then what does it tell you? That you're not valued, that environment in which you grew up is not the environment that belongs to sterling silver pots and hickory chairs and cigar store Indians, etc. That's not what that space is. And that's what I mean about broadening this notion of aesthetic, broadening this idea of where great art comes. And one of the things that I say that a lot of times when I talk about art, when the Barnes was created, and I did a lot of research in the Barnes archives. And when it opened in 1925, Dewey did the opening address, and Barnes sent a draft to Barnes, and Barnes sent it back. He said, make sure to mention the Negroes. I want people to know I'm serious about this business. And so in the opening address, he said that one of the things the foundation did, one of the most important things it did, was address America's most consistent problem, race. And it showed that everyone was capable of making great beauty. That the foundation itself was created as the first multicultural exhibition space in the country. On purpose. It wasn't created to celebrate Renoir, Cézanne, and Matisse. It was celebrated to elevate all of the artists whose names we didn't know to the status of Renoir, Cézanne, and Matisse. It's the reason people hated it and still do, right? Those things can't exist in that same space. And so you can imagine, as a museum director, I was a bit controversial, but I would say to people, you know, this is the greatest painter of all time. I said, why? Explain to me how that happens, because there's this little tiny part of the world called Europe. And you can't tell me that was the best painter ever, because you don't know what was happening in any other place in the world. Those explorations are still ongoing now, and are still hampered by our ideas about race and value. So that we don't look in those spaces for things that are extraordinary and beautiful. And as Lonnie says with the work that he's doing, which, you know, we talk, I call him my brother from another mother, but we talk often about these ideas because, yes, we are African American, we are Black Americans. And it is just part of the dialogue that we create. There's a bigger conversation here. And someone's inability to see that in us, which is not sort of my problem, it's their problem, right? I went looking for Black artists when I came out of school. And I remember I had one class, everything else in college was about white men. So I majored in the art of Japan and China as an art historian. Because the only thing they taught, it wasn't about the white dudes in France. And I accidentally double majored for that very reason. So I came home, I had one class called Afro-American Art, was with that Elsa Honig Fine book. And it was the only Black faculty I ever saw at Pitt other than one other guy. Everybody else was Black. And so I came home and I set up a studio in the guest room and I'm sitting there painting. Like, what the hell am I doing? What? And so I called the African American Museum. It had just been open. It hadn't been open. It opened in 1976 or in 78, just out of school. And I've been painting for 56 years now. And I literally said to them, rather than Rowan Stewart or somebody answered, but I said, where are the Black artists? There have to be some. They can't all be dead. And she said, oh yeah, National Conference of Artists. And so I went out to Germantown in my Volkswagen bus, and that's how I met Nasha May Lindo. But that's also how I met Semela Lewis and Selma Burke and Bearden and Jacob Lawrence and Jeff Donaldson and Elizabeth Catlett, and I could go on and on and on. This huge community of amazing artists, mind-bending artists. It's how I met someone like Dr. Grace Hampton, and a whole other dimension of what our aesthetic was. I met Eugene Grigsby, who's one of the scholars, leading scholars in African-American, teaching African-American children African-American art. David Driscoll.
Yeah, absolutely.
The scholarship is there, the work is there, but it is still set apart because whenever there's a Black show, it gets, oh my God, the Met is doing a Black show. It shouldn't be that way. These should be integral elements of what it is that we talk about and the complexities of what we mean about race. I don't know that they're going to even be further solved in my lifetime. When you have hundreds of years of history that drum into people's heads that you're superior and you're inferior, that this is the real stuff and yours is the other stuff, that is based on an artificiality that does not exist other than in our own minds. What does art do? Art speaks to what it is in our soul, in our heart, in our mind. But the minute you cut off that conversation, I think, Najmi and I had a friend, Janet Collins, who was amazing, and her grandmother, I think it was her grandmother, we were over her grandmother's house one day, and she didn't say a whole lot. She was sitting in a rocking chair and she talked. And every now and then she'd say something, but very few words. But I remember one time she was sitting there and she said, when you see a fool, pass them by. If people aren't willing to open themselves enough to understand what my voice means in a broader context, that's their problem.
I have you go, no, you go.
The tricky part is that as we sit here now, and as we assess these issues, and as we try to put a name on it, as we try to identify it, as we try to figure out what and how to do about it, as soon as we think we put our finger on it, it's moved.
Yep.
The thing is always evolving. We, as creative people, have to continue to figure out a way to wrestle with it and contend with it and identify it as it's moving. So that means that not only do we have to deal with it, but we have to take what we know and help other people in the future try to figure out what to do with it. And so our responsibility doesn't stop, it doesn't lie here. Our responsibility lies in the future.
So that's a perfect segue, and we're almost done. No, we're almost out of time. We're not necessarily done. But that's a perfect segue to my next question, and I might not articulate it as well as I hope, so might need some help. When I look at both of your work, I see bravery. How do you get to the point? Because as creatives, we always have these things in our mind and we're self-editing and we're saying, oh, no. And sometimes it's based upon things we have seen before and we're afraid to create things that have not been seen. Now, I can call you either crazy
That's part of it.
or brilliant. Yeah, I guess depends on what time of day it is. But how, for the artists out there, how in the world do you get to the point of being so brave?
I can't help it. So like I told you, I was 6. I was born that way. It's not a matter of bravery. It might be.
What do you think?
Yeah, no,
it might be stupidity.
You think it's bravery? I think it's
It could be, it's part of really needing to say something, needing to communicate those ideas, needing to relate to people, knowing and understanding ourselves and each other. I don't know if that's brave.
Okay.
I don't know.
What do you think?
I think it is courage, because the idea that we can sit as an equal across from anybody is courage in this society. Because every other factor suggests that you're not supposed to be able to do that. I always tell people that creativity comes from an incredible amount of hubris followed by horrific self-doubt.
That's wonderful.
It's the juncture that creates that creative energy, right? I'm going to say this by making this piece of work. Okay. Here it is. It's why I never watch myself on video. People said, oh, is the video great? I haven't seen it. I will never watch it.
I'll never see this.
I'm not doing it. I say to me, what do you think about the video? It's great. I said, oh, great. I will never watch. I've never watched myself. I could not do that and then continue to do what it is that I do. And there is courage to say to somebody, you need to try and open your vista so you can fully hear my voice. And my voice is going to be a lot wider and stronger and louder than you assume it can be because of who I am.
And you know what, you mentioned earlier, that Lonnie actually gave you some of that.
Yes. Lonnie transferred a level of, I had never met anybody else, and it could be because I'm an only child, so I wasn't around a whole lot of people. And while my dad's family were all artists, these were the adults. And so, you know, most only children, people think only children are spoiled. We're not, we're just used to spending the time with adults and not children. You know, so, you know, children bore us to hell. I had never met anybody who was my peer, who was adventuresome. And I can remember, and the reason it stuck me profoundly, in 1968, there was a trip that the Camden School Board organized to go to the Bahamas. And I remember my dad, we got tickets, the first time we ever went out of the country. And I remember my father being so excited because he said, this is the first time that I can leave the country and know that I can come back. And I never knew what he meant until I realized that prior to the civil rights movement, there were all of these factors that could in fact strip you of your citizenship after you left the country so that you couldn't come back. So he never envisioned that was part of his reality. And yet here I met this young man who gets on the plane and goes halfway across the world without any, you know, that's not an issue for him. You know, is it that we have that cellular memory from the previous, you know, generation? Absolutely. I was talking to somebody the other day, I said, my great-grandmother was a sharecropper. They didn't have indoor plumbing until they moved in town. She lived to be 101 years old. That's just 2 generations away. My mother told a story when she would go south to visit her grandmother, my great-grandmother, every year. When they got to DC, they had to get off the train and run to the back of the train.
Yeah.
Because the trains were segregated. I'm sitting here now telling you that's part of my memory of my existence right now. And so for people to do this thing, I can't believe there's racism in 2024. It's like, why not? These are not things that happened way back.
My grandmother was born in 1862.
Mine was born in 1889. That meant her mother, my great-great-grandmother, Laney, that there was a lot of raping going on for me to be half European and half Yoruba. But
And
it's
my
not
father
that
was
far
raised in
along.
Georgia in 1929.
It's not that far.
Most lynchings in that year.
That's exactly
In the
right.
county, there's not most lynchings in that
Yeah.
year.
And so even, you know, even the resonance of contemporary ideas and values and the stuff that's happening in the political environment. When I tell people I'm at a place where I feel like my life is in danger because of the kind of conversations that are happening. When you're Black, you get pulled back into that space. Because there's still people who believe in that inferiority, superiority thing. And sometimes I can't blame people. It take a couple 100 years and tell everybody that they're better than everybody else. I guess at some point they're going to believe it. But you really need to stop doing that.
It is 7:33.
Any other questions we have from the
Are there any
webinar
questions?
audience?
Can we take questions from, well, that's it from the
We have any
webinar
more?
audience?
We do have multiple.
Oh, let me read it.
Wow. You guys all right?
Well, did we have any questions from this audience?
Okay, webinar.
We stun people with confusion.
Why do we feel we have to have the discussion when all art is created by artists based on their feelings, lived experiences, and personal imagination, etc.? Is it merely because the colonizers, I guess it's colonizers, need to have BIPOC art validated?
First of all, let me say, I don't use any of that language about race. I use BIPOC, multicultural, Black, brown, none of that. It is an artificiality that is as ridiculous as I try to identify race. Yes, there is oppression and oppression of different groups. There were laws written to oppress us. Period, end of story. There were some of those behaviors that were exacted on other people, but there were laws written to put us in our place and to keep us there. Social Security was written to exclude most African Americans. Suburban living was excluded most African Americans by law.
GI Bill.
Western expansion excluded African Americans by law. Asian Americans who were here during the railroad and then kicked out because of the Asian Exclusion Act, the people who are currently here now, the Asians that have immigrated here now, are not their children. They don't have that cellular memory of oppression. We can't escape it. And so the only reason it becomes relative is because people keep saying that's what we are. And what I keep trying to help people understand is that's okay as an identifier, but don't let it go any further than to try and have you define what it is that I'm allowed to make or the images that I'm allowed to explore. Because that's when we get into conflict. The only thing that this BIPOC, the only thing we have in common is that we're not white, really. But our realities are so different. The migrant immigration community now, there's no relationship whatsoever to the experience of African Americans. Other than that they're treated badly by white people. Badly is one thing, law is another. And as Lonnie and I and Rhinold have said, this is part of our existence, right? All of us, I don't know how old you are, Rhinold, but Lonnie and I were born before the Civil Rights Movement was enacted. When it was legal
You're not older than
to
me.
exclude us. I probably am.
Hmm,
We probably both are.
I don't know.
Sorry.
It's not a thing.
I'm Richard Elvis. Yeah, that's the point I wanted to make.
Yeah,
And
no,
that's the reason why. And
You wanna answer that?
No, I feel for these people. I mean,
did we confuse everybody?
Do we think this is a perfect way to
Yes.
end? Well, first of all, please give us. Marjorie,
Thank you so much for this very important conversation, really appreciate it. Thank you all for coming, we really appreciate that.
Before we go, Marjorie, can I ask two things? One is, for the people who are on the webinar, if you could put in the chat where you're joining us from, your zip code, because the museum could use that information to help them with future funding. That would really be great. I know some people are running into issues with registering, and we want to make sure that they know that this institution has a wide reach.
Spoken like a museum.
Bob back and forth. The other thing is November 15th, I will be back here to do an artist talk and demonstration. And I'll speak more specifically about how I create some of my work. I'll bring examples of some pieces and images of me actually working. And hopefully we'll have a lot of fun. I go into the history of dolls, some with Barbie and Bill Billy and G.I. Joe and all of that stuff. So we're gonna have a lot of fun with that. And so please come back November 15th.
Thank you.
thank you.
I know, we'll show guys.
Well, we were holding that.
Okay.
Get in order here.
Talks for a little.
New Jersey.
Yes, and California, and State. She just started.